Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. Once again, we're here with Harvey Wasserman, an American journalist, author, democracy activist. And in these days, he is fighting to make sure that the suppression that's occurring throughout the country is mitigated. Harvey Wasserman, welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. How are you doing today, my friend?
I'm great, Edgardo. It's really great to be on with you.
Well, it's always great having you. First of all, Greg, tell us, you're also with KPFA in
KPFK in Los Angeles. I've got my show is California Solartopia, and we are really down to the wire. This is the week that we all go crazy and get really exhausted, Egberto, because it's never been more tense.
I want folks to know about your website also, Softopia.
Yeah.
Let's spell it out for us.
Okay, so solartopia.org is my personal website. It has all my books, including my upcoming People's Spiral of U.S. History. Now, this is a history of the United States that I have finished as of the summer, but then I realized I can't really put it out until
I wonder why.
A result of, so I have it now. If anybody wants to write me at solartopia@gmail, SOLARTOPIA @gmail.com, I will send you a free PDF of this history book as it goes to the ending is about Bernie and how great it looks and that the young millennials are going to remake the world. But then I said, God, what happens in the election? So I am hoping for a happy ending, folks. And we have to make a happy ending happen with this election. I'm saying this is the most important election in human history since Germany 1933. You can find American elections that were important, but none on a world scale like this one.
Well, let me tell you, I am actually speaking it out. We need to let people understand that we expect victory because we are going to work towards victory.
Absolutely.
And I don't want the wrong side to think that they have the possibility of victory. So I believe I'm a positive thinker and not only a positive thinker, but doer. But Harvey, there's a lot happening which you are working on with respect to voter suppression. And I think it's important, especially 6 days before the election and right while people are early voting, that we talk about that and you give people some direction.
Well, what's happening is that the Republicans are doing everything in their power to suppress the vote. We can go through a litany, but we know the general picture. And now they have a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. So for Donald Trump, safe harbor, which is a phrase in one of the many laws having to do with elections and the election of the Electoral College, is to get this election somehow to the Supreme Court. And the only defense we have is to have such an overwhelmingly large vote that it becomes politically impossible for them to do that. We saw it in 2008 and 2012 with Obama, where the margins of victory were too high and there were too many states for them to flip over the Electoral College. So we are all deeply heartened by the immense turnouts for early voting and apparently for vote by mail that are going on all over the country, especially the really wave of millennials and the tip of the Generation Z, which is just becoming eligible to vote. These young people, there's 85 million millennials. I mean, it's the biggest generational hump in world history, even bigger than the baby boom.
Imagine that, yes.
Yeah, 76 million. So this is what we're all pinning our hopes on. Now, everywhere we go, from Alabama to Pennsylvania to Michigan, the forces that be are trying to suppress not only the turnout, but also the vote count. And every dirty trick that these guys can play, they are playing. And that's what we have to counter. We have armies of lawyers out there. Now, the NAACP in North Carolina, for example, is putting lawyers into every precinct that they can. We hope that's going on all over the country. We don't really have a sense of what the Democrats are doing, but thankfully people are not waiting for the Democrats. They're going out and doing everything they can as individuals to make sure that this thing doesn't get away from us.
Now you have a group, the Emergency
It's the Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition, or as someone has called it, GREEP. And our website is Grassroots EP, GRASSROOTSEP for electionprotection.org. And we post every article we can get. We have a Zoom. We've been having Zoom calls every Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern time. We'll continue this after the election. We have had 22 rather, emergency election protection meetings with between 50 and 100 people, 90 minutes each. So we've spent more than 30 hours talking about nothing but what is being done to steal this election and how to prevent it from happening.
Now, you said something interesting. You said that you're putting people in as many precincts as you can, and I imagine you're selecting those precincts in areas where you think there could be problems, correct?
Yes, well, and especially heavily populated areas, and of course, swing state areas. These are specifically in Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Texas now, and Arizona, and even Iowa. Those are all states that could go one way or another.
Now, as it turns out, the Republicans were spending some money to install some goons around the country. What's the state of that?
Well, what's happening, we are having some reports, but when this was set up earlier in the year, it was assumed that everybody would be coming out, on November 3rd to vote, which has been the traditional way to do it in America. But because of the COVID, there's been a massive switch to vote by mail and to early voting. So the whatever disarray the right wing was hoping to impose with their Klan-style militias turning up at the polls has been diffused because there hasn't been the centralized voting that they were expecting, and so we do expect a really massive ugliness. And we have had a few instances in Alexandria, Virginia, for example, which is a blue area. There was a batch of Trumpites who turned up not wearing masks, weaponizing the virus, blocking the sidewalk, yelling and screaming. I saw a report, people are around the block in these lines, and there was a report that there was a caravan that was circling the blocks, yelling at people in the lines in Philadelphia. We expect election day to be pretty ugly, and we're asking people, even over the weekend, we're asking people to turn out to non-violently protect the people who are standing in line.
That is, yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So so far it's not been as bad as we feared. My understanding is there's more than 60 million people have already voted. Which is
over 70 now, my brother, over 70.
So, this is happening. And this is a movement, an election protection movement, which has become a significant player. I got to tell you, Bob Fitrakis and Bob Fitrakis is a political science PhD who has a law degree and has been doing election protection since El Salvador in the 1980s, for God's sakes. When we were living in Columbus, Ohio, and we were reporting on the theft of the presidential election in Ohio in 2004, we were just, blown off as conspiracy theorists, and I think people on the coasts figured if we lived in Ohio, how smart could we be? But finally, all these years later, after 2016 and the horrors of 4 years of Donald Trump, people have taken us seriously.
Well, I think with what's going on with the virus completely exploding in this last week, I think that is going to be that's going to be the tipping point for a lot of Republicans who are culturally Republicans and simply stick with Donald Trump because, well, he's a Republican and I just can't pull the lever for a Democrat. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you hear and you read a lot of traditional Republicans can't stomach Donald Trump. I heard a long interview with a woman on NPR who had voted for Trump, lifelong Republican, who had voted for Trump in 2016 and just could not believe that what she had seen for the last 4 years, and said for the first time in her life, she voted a straight blue ticket. So, we'll see. The question is, there are issues in virtually every state, of repression, of injecting chaos on purpose. But we do have, Egberto, and this is important to understand, this is a major, a monumental turning point in elections in America for a number of reasons. Number one, it's the first one since way back when that is being conducted almost entirely on paper. We had a spell from 2002, 2004, where voting was done on electronic touchscreens. And those machines were perfectly designed to steal elections. We called it touch and pray. You would go in, you'd hit a button, and God knows what would happen. This year, because of the COVID and because of vote by mail, a very large majority of the ballots will be cast on paper. And that means that we actually have paper to hold on to.
A paper trail. Harvey, I have been completely not misinformed. I guess I misinformed myself, because I'm in a state where electronic voting is very popular. It's in my area, it's the thing that's done the most without a paper trail. And so in discussing with people, that's always been my concern. Can these votes be stolen? It's really refreshing to hear that you say most of our ballots now will be paper in this particular election, because it minimizes the possibility of, it minimizes messing with the vote, if you will.
Yes, well, they can be messed with. I mean, in the old days, everybody voted on paper. That's all we had. And somehow a lot of the ballots wound up in rivers and dumpsters.
Wait a minute, you're making Trump sound sane now. Come on.
Yeah. So no, but that's why Trump hates vote by mail. There are a number of reasons. First of all, it's not as easy to steal in the vote count. And as we say, if you're putting your vote in the mail, you're not being vulnerable to the malicious.
Right.
So you're a moving target. Finally, thank God. So that's a big deal. And the other thing is that it's a massive generational changeover.
Yes.
As I said, including, by the way, the poll workers. Poll workers historically have been the elder people, because it's a day and you come out, you get paid. And but because of the COVID, clearly they didn't come out. And there was a moment, a few weeks ago, where suddenly people realized that the polls are going to be worked by millennials. And in some cases, actually, in most cases, the law is to be a poll worker, you have to be a resident of that precinct. But you don't have to be actually old enough to vote. And so we're having a lot of 15, 16, 17-year-olds turning up to vote, Generation Zs. I saw one case where there's such a demand, such a supply, so many kids who want to, it's good money, actually.
Yeah.
So many kids want to come in and vote that they set a minimum grade point. You have to have like a 3.0 to work the polls, which is, an incentive for kids for grades. So this is a big deal. And of course, we also have a woman of color. And I think that the woman that Kamala Harris is actually, of the four, of Trump, Pence, Biden, and Kamala, she's the one this election's really about, because we have a huge shift in the demographic nature of the electorate. And some have called it, for Trump's people, it's a demographic death march.
Right.
Of all the places, you're feeling it most in Texas.
Yes.
Because you have this giant shift from white men, represented by Donald Trump, who is the ultimate white misogynist, racist, antique, to a very diverse country.
Right.
And where by 2050 or even earlier, the majority of the country will not be white men or even white. And that we've already got California, New Mexico, Florida, states are really, and Georgia, that's what states are flipping over demographically. And so one of the reasons I think that the Trump people are so ferocious is that it's white, older white men who cannot uh, face,
Fathom.
can't face the reality of what's
Yeah.
happened to the demographics of our country.
You know,
They're pushing the stream with their desperate hands there.
sadly, what they don't realize is there's nothing wrong with that. That nobody is a real majority. That we all have. I mean, it is. I am still trying to figure the pathology of thinking that having a society that looks like the world somehow is a bad thing. I don't know. Maybe there's something wrong with my thinking
No,
process.
what it is that the United States was formed, overrunning the indigenous. The United States was formed by white Christian, calling themselves Christian. I mean, I
Right.
think Jesus saw the state of what calls itself modern Christianity, pull his hair out. But they have run America, the United States of America, since the 1600s, and they, with the formation of slavery, they have assumed a position of domination. You have to understand, Egberto, that the covenant with the devil that was made in the United States with slavery was actually not about economics. It was about power. In the 1680s, there was a rebellion in Virginia. It was called Bacon's Rebellion. I know this sounds deep in the weeds, but it's very clear the reality. And most of the labor force in America, in Virginia, where they were growing, tobacco on a plantation system, was it was not slave labor, it was indentured servitude,
Hmm.
and you had blacks and whites working side by side, and racism was not a thing. There's a wonderful book by Lerone Bennett about this. Blacks and whites fraternized, they worked together, they actually intermarried. There were, a lot of mixed race children. It did not occur. I know this is hard to believe, but it did not really occur to people to be racist. And then suddenly, this rebellion, the plantation owners realized that they could not afford to have a labor force where blacks and whites could unite. This happened in Bacon's Rebellion. There was an upheaval. It was not a great thing. They were demanding more land be taken from the Indians, but nonetheless, the blacks and the whites together overtook the government of Virginia. They burned Jamestown to the ground. They forced the governor to flee. And so the big guys realized that the one way they could protect themselves was to it was not a class system, it was a caste system,
Right. Right.
CASTE. And that with slavery, they made black people subhuman. They gave them the status of non-humans so that the white people could feel superior. And that has been with us since the 1680s.
You
Uh,
know. Yeah.
and
Go
it's
ahead. I'm sorry.
and yeah, no, and so that's where the racism that's so deeply ingrained in America came about.
You know, I've been talking about that without knowing the real history for a long time. I got all of that from inference. You're giving it from a historical perspective. I'm glad for that. I trust that all of that is in your new book.
Yes, the People's Spiral of U.S. History, and it really even quotes Lyndon Johnson as saying basically, if you give a white man the feeling he's superior to a black man, he'll do anything for you. So no matter how bad off a white man might be, he's still not black. And that was the whole basis of the racism in America. There's a lot of argument about whether slavery was actually an efficient system. You can make a case that it was a money loser, and that indentured servitude was actually more efficient.
Let me stop you right there, Harvey, because what you just said, you corroborated exactly what I've been telling my audience for a long time, and that is that the capitalism as we practice it today is just an antiseptic form of slavery that works a lot better. The slave had to be taken care of, the slave had to be fed, the slave had to be kept alive, the slave had to be insured. You work under capitalism. When you're no longer of use to folks, throw you away and get the next.
Exactly. And you know, the Civil War, which was definitely about slavery, was also about capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And the Northerners, the Northern industrialists, did not want the West to have slave labor. They wanted a free market in labor. Of course, the West also, they grew corn and wheat. You don't really grow
Yeah.
corn and wheat with slave labor. I mean, the reason the slavery was used in the South was because tobacco and cotton, as well as indigo and rice, those were all, could be
Labor
done with slave
intensive.
labor.
Yeah.
But once they invented the reaper and some other of the big tools, corn and soy and all the other things, and well, basically beef. You don't do beef with slave labor, but we're just coming out of it. And one of the significant reasons that the millennial changeover is so significant is that we baby boomers, we faced two monumental institutions that needed revolution. And number one was the culture, involving racism, misogyny, sexual uptightness, all those things that came with into the 1950s. And number two was the empire. And as a boomer, I think we succeeded in revolutionizing the culture. I mean, God knows it's a long way to go. But the millennials, our children, have grown up really not entirely, but pretty free of racism and misogyny and prejudice against LGBTQ. Drug, sex, rock and roll, marijuana is legal now, thank God. I mean, I wrote one of the first editorials at the University of Michigan on the student paper, if you can imagine this. I was the editorial director, and one day I didn't have anything else to write about, so I went in and I wrote an editorial for legalizing pot, which I had never smoked. And it sounds today like, oh, ho-hum, but back then it was global news.
Right.
Hey, this student at Michigan is advocating legal marijuana. It was in January of 1967, for God's sakes, 53 years ago, and people went crazy. I was on all these TV shows. It was a giant issue, and I had never smoked pot at the time. But now, it's legal all over the country, and so much else has changed. But what we're up against now is the empire. And
Now, Harvey,
yes.
we're coming up on time, so why don't you answer me what you would have wished I asked you about voter suppression or whatever that I didn't?
Well, listen, Egberto, you asked me what needed to be asked, which what's happening with this election. We know that Donald Trump has a choice between the White House and the big house. And he has got to stay in power or he's going to go to prison or have to leave the country, as he himself said. So every dirty trick that can ever be pushed to try and prevent people from voting, they are doing it, and to prevent the votes from being counted. And so, from fake, here in California, they put up fake drop boxes.
I heard that. I saw that.
Yes, some drop boxes have caught on fire in Texas.
Yes.
In Ohio, they're allowing one drop box per county, so you can have a small rural county where you got a few hundred people with a drop box, and then in Houston and Dallas and Austin, there's one drop box in the whole county. Every day in Alabama, they required sheets of witness sheets, and then suddenly they didn't. And there's signature issues. There, every issue that you could imagine. They want people to be watched while the votes are being counted. They're spreading every misinformation that can be spread. Now, we saw this in Ohio 2004 and wrote a book about it. And so Bob Fetrakis and I, so none of this is unfamiliar. But the question you've asked, what is being done to suppress the vote? The answer is everything. And we got to be prepared. And the only protection we have is a vote count, a vote to turnout that's too big to turn away.
Harvey Wasserman, thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right again. You always have informative stuff for us, so I really appreciate that. You have a wonderful rest of your day.
You're the greatest, Egberto. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.